with other lords associated with him. Mary appointed commissioners to appear for her, and the two parties went into court, each thinking that it was the other which was accused and on trial. The court assembled, and after being opened with great parade and ceremony, commenced the investigation of the questions at issue, which led of course to endless criminations and recriminations, the ground covering the whole history of Mary's career in Scotland. They went on for some weeks in this hopeless labyrinth, until at length Moray produced the famous letters alleged to have been written by Mary to Boswell before Darnley's murder, as a part of the evidence, and charged Mary on the strength of this evidence with having been an abettor in the murder. Elizabeth, finding that the affair was becoming, as in fact she wished it to become, more and more involved, and wishing to get Mary more and more entangled in it, and to draw her still further into her power, ordered the conference, as the court was called, to be adjourned to London. Here things took such a turn that Mary complained that she was herself treated in so unjust a manner, and Moray in his cause were allowed so many unfair advantages, that she could not allow the discussion on her part to continue. The conference was accordingly broken up, each party charging the other with being the cause of the interruption. Moray returned to Scotland to resume his government there. Mary was held a closer captive than ever. She sent to Elizabeth asking her to remove these restraints and allow her to depart either to her own country or to France. Elizabeth replied that she could not, considering all the circumstances of the case, allow her to leave England, but that if she would give up all claims to the government of Scotland to her son, the young prince, she might remain in peace in England. Mary replied that she would suffer death 1,000 times rather than dishonor herself in the eyes of the world by abandoning, in such a way, her right as a sovereign. The last words which she should speak, she said, should be those of the Queen of Scotland. Elizabeth therefore considered that she had no alternative left but to keep Mary a prisoner. She accordingly retained her for some time in confinement, but she soon found that such charge was a serious encumbrance to her, and one not unattended with danger. The disaffected in her own realm were beginning to form plots, and to consider whether they could not, in some way or other, make use of Mary's claims to the English crown to aid them. Finally, Elizabeth came to the conclusion, when she had become a little satiated with the feeling, at first so delightful, of having Mary in her power, that after all it would be quite as convenient to have her imprisoned in Scotland, and she opened a negotiation with Moray for delivering Mary into his hands. He was, on his part, to agree to save her life, and to keep her a close prisoner, and he was to deliver hostages to Elizabeth as security for the fulfillment of these obligations. Various difficulties, however, occurred in the way of the accomplishment of these plans, and before the arrangement was finally completed, it was cut suddenly short by Moray's miserable end. One of the Hamiltons, who had been with Mary at Langside, was taken prisoner after the battle. Moray, who, of course, as the legally constituted regent in the name of James, considered himself as representing the royal authority of the kingdom, regarded these prisoners as rebels taken in the act of insurrection against their sovereign. They were condemned to death, but finally were pardoned at the place of execution. Their estates were, however, confiscated and given to the followers and favorites of Moray. One of these men, in taking possession of House of Hamilton, with a cruel brutality characteristic of the times, turned Hamilton's family out abruptly in a cold night, perhaps exasperated by resistance which he may have encountered. The wife of Hamilton, it is said, was sent out naked, but the expression means probably very insufficiently clothed for such an exposure. At any rate, the unhappy outcast wandered about, half frantic with anger and terror, until before morning she was wholly frantic and insane. To have such a calamity brought upon him in consequence merely of his fidelity to his queen was, as the bereaved and wretched husband thought, an injury not to be borne. He considered Moray the responsible author of these miseries, and silently and calmly resolved on a terrible revenge. Moray was making a progress through the country, travelling in state with a great retinue, and was to pass through Linlithgow. There was a town of that name close by the palace. Hamilton provided himself with a room in one of the houses on the principal street, through which he knew that Moray must pass. He had a fleet horse ready for him at the back door. The front door was barricaded. There was a sort of balcony or gallery projecting toward the street, with a window in it. He stationed himself here, having carefully taken every precaution to prevent his being seen from the street, or overheard in his movements. Moray lodged in the town during the night, and Hamilton posted himself in his ambuscade the next morning, armed with a gun. The town was thronged, and Moray, on issuing from his lodging, escorted by his cavalcade, found the streets crowded with spectators. He made his way slowly on account of the throng. When he arrived at the proper point, Hamilton took his aim in a cool and deliberate manner, screened from observation by black cloth with which he had darkened his hiding place. He fired. The ball passed through the body of the regent, and thence, descending as it went, killed a horse on the other side of him. Moray fell. There was a universal outcry of surprise and fear. They made an onset upon the house from which the shot had been fired. The door was strongly barricaded. Before they could get the means to force an entrance, Hamilton was on his horse and far away. The regent was carried to his lodgings and died that night. Moray was Queen Mary's half-brother, and the connection of his fortunes with hers, considered in respect to its intimacy and the length of its duration, was, on the whole, greater than that of any other individual. He may be said to have governed Scotland in reality during the whole of Mary's nominal reign, first as her minister and friend, and afterward as her competitor and foe. He was, at any rate, during most of her life, her nearest relative and her most constant companion, and Mary mourned his death with many tears. There was a great nobleman in England, named the Duke of Norfolk, who had vast estates, and was regarded as the greatest subject in the realm. He was a Catholic. Among the other countless schemes and plots to which Mary's presence in England gave rise, he formed a plan of marrying her, and through her, claim to the crown, and by the help of the Catholics, to overturn the government of Elizabeth. He entered into negotiations with Mary, and she consented to become his wife, without, however, as she says, being a party to his political schemes. His plots were discovered. He was imprisoned, tried, and beheaded. Mary was accused of sharing the guilt of his treason. She denied this. She was not very vigorously proceeded against, but she suffered in the event of the affair another sad disappointment in her hopes of liberty, and her confinement became more strict and absolute than ever. Still, she had quite a numerous retinue of attendants. Many of her former friends were allowed to continue with her. Jane Kennedy, who had escaped with her from Lochleven, remained in her service. She was removed from castle to castle, at Elizabeth's orders, to diminish the probability of the forming and maturing of plans of escape. She amused herself sometimes in embroidery and similar pursuits, and sometimes she pined and languished under the pressure of her sorrows and woes. 16 or 18 years passed away in this manner. She was almost forgotten. Very exciting public events were taking place in England and in Scotland, and the name of the poor captive queen at length seemed to pass from men's minds, except so far as it was whispered secretly in plots and intrigues. End of Chapter 11, The Long Captivity. Recording by Nelson Farrell Mallory. Portland, Maine.